The first thing Fen felt was the cold. It wasn't the crisp, biting cold of a winter wind, but a heavy, damp chill that seemed to seep out of the very stone beneath him. It smelled of wet earth, iron, and the unmistakable, cloying scent of decay. He opened his eyes, or rather he tried to. His eyelids felt as though they had been sealed shut with dried mud and blood. When he finally forced them open, he saw nothing but an oppressive, suffocating blackness. Where am I? He tried to shift his weight, but his limbs were leaden. As his hand slid across the floor, it didn't meet smooth stone. Instead, his fingers brushed against something hard, thin, and brittle. There was a sickening crack. He pulled back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. In the near-total darkness, his feline-slitted eyes began to adjust. He was lying in a pile of bones. They were not human, or rather, not entirely. They were the skeletal remains of Anbels. He saw the elongated snouts of foxfolk, the heavy rib cages of oxmen, and most terrifyingly, the unmistakable skulls of his own kind. Wolves! Fen gasped, a ragged, dry sound that scratched his throat. Memory was a shattered mirror in his mind. He knew his name, Fen, but nothing else. No home, no family, no reason for being cast into this literal pit of the dead. Suddenly, a flash of light blinded him. It wasn't a torch or a sunbeam. A translucent, golden-inked scroll unfurled in the air, directly in front of his face. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, like a heartbeat. Heavenly Ledger of the Lone Wolf. User Fenrace, Wolf Anbel status, fallen/enslaved, true chi level 0, dormant technique, none current objective, survived the pit. Fen reached out to touch it, but his hand passed through the light. It wasn't physical. It was an apparition burned into his retinas. "What is this?" he whispered. As if in response, the ink shifted. The golden lines swirled like liquid starlight, forming new characters. Initiating awakening protocol condition, met near-death resonance. Reward shattered moonstyle. Volume 1. Description: the ancient martial path of the Silver Pack. To lead, one must first endure the dark. A surge of heat suddenly erupted in Fen's chest. It felt as if he had swallowed a live coal. The heat traveled down his arms and legs, flushing out the cold. His muscles, previously withered and weak, twitched with a foreign, electric energy. Information flooded his brain, striking patterns, breathing techniques, and the flow of chi through invisible meridians. He saw himself, or a version of himself, moving like a shadow under a pale moon, his claws trailing silver light. Crack. A heavy stone door at the top of the pit groaned open. A sliver of torchlight spilled down, illuminating the mountain of bones. "Oi! Any of the curs still breathing down there?" a gruff, guttural voice shouted. Fen looked up. Hovering over the lip of the pit was the silhouette of a boar Anbel. The creature was massive, clad in crude iron plates, over silk robes that were far too small for its bulging frame. It held a whip in one hand and a heavy cleaver in the other. "The master needs more disposables for the deeper veins," the boar grunted, spitting a glob of phlegm into the pit. "If you can crawl, you can mine." Fen remained still, his heart racing. The ledger pulsed a deep, warning red. Threat detected enemy. Iron-Hoof Guard, Boar Anbel. Danger level, low intermediate. Advice, do not reveal your chi. Play the victim. Fen lowered his head, hiding the growing fire in his eyes. He was a wolf, a race supposedly broken and discarded by history. But as the heat of the shattered moon settled into his bones, he knew one thing for certain. The master was going to regret leaving him alive. The Iron-Hoof Mines were a labyrinth of misery carved into the bowels of a jagged mountain range. For the next 3 days, Fen existed in a blur of exhaustion and pain. He was chained to a line of other wolf ambels, their fur matted with grime, their spirits long since extinguished. Every day was the same. They were marched into the deep veins to mine for spirit stones, glowing crystals used to power the Jade Empire's luxuries. The air was thick with stone dust that burned the lungs, and the only sound was the rhythmic clink-clink of pickaxes and the occasional crack of a whip. "Keep your head down, kid," a voice rasped beside him. Fen turned slightly. The wolf next to him was older, his gray fur scarred and missing in patches. One of his ears had been notched, a slave mark. This was Kale. "I've seen that look in your eyes," Coyle muttered, swinging his pickaxe with a practiced mechanical rhythm. "That's the look of a wolf who thinks he can bite back. Don't. The boars love an excuse to use the cleaver." "We're dying here anyway," Fen whispered back, his eyes darting to the heavenly ledger, which was currently displaying his true chi progression, 12%. Kale let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Better to die slow and breathing than fast and screaming. Look at the guards. They aren't just boars. There are hawks in the rafters and hounds at the gates. You can't outrun the Empire." Fen didn't argue, but he watched. He used the ledger not just to track his power, but to map the environment. The scroll acted like a supernatural radar, highlighting structural weaknesses in the mine shafts and the patrol routes of the guards. That night, in the cramped, freezing barracks, Fen sat cross-legged. The other slaves were asleep, their breathing heavy and labored. "Ledger," he thought, "show me the shattered moon." The scroll appeared, glowing softly. Shattered moon style, technique 1, crescent step. Status, unlocked. Cost, 5 chi units. Description, a movement technique that allows the user to move within the blind spot of an opponent's vision. Fen began to breathe as the scroll dictated. Long, slow draws of air that pulled the ambient energy from the spirit stone dust in the room. He felt the chi swirl in his lower abdomen, a small, spinning vortex of silver light. Suddenly, the barracks door kicked open. "Sick ward! Now!" a guard barked. 2 boars dragged a limp figure into the room and tossed her onto the hay-covered floor. It was a female wolf Anbel. Even under the filth, her features were sharp and regal. Her fur was a striking snowy white, though it was now stained with blood. "She tried to steal medicinal herbs from the storehouse," the guard spat. "If she isn't fit to work by sunrise, she goes back to the bone pit." The guards left, locking the heavy iron grate behind them. Fen crawled over to her. The ledger flickered. New character encountered. Name, Yuna Roll, healer/rebel. Condition, severe internal bruising/chi depletion. Ledger mandate, the pack protects its own. Heal her to begin the formation. "I can help," Fen whispered. Kale appeared at his shoulder, his face pale. "Leave her, Fen. She's a healer from the old northern tribes. The guards hate her kind the most. If they see you touching her, they'll think you're conspiring." Fen ignored him. He placed his hand on Yuna's cold shoulder. He didn't know how to heal, but the ledger guided his hand. "Redirect 10% of true ki to the palm," the scroll commanded. Fen felt the silver warmth leave his body and flow into her. Yuna's eyes snapped open. They were a piercing, defiant amber. For a moment, she looked ready to claw his throat out, but then she saw the faint, ethereal glow of the ledger, reflecting in Fen's pupils. a light only he was supposed to see, yet she seemed to sense its presence. "You?" she breathed, her voice a ghost of a sound. "You have the mark of the pact." "I don't know what that is," Fen said, his voice steady. "I just know we aren't staying here." Yuna's recovery was faster than Kyle had predicted. Within hours, the silver chi Fen had gifted her had knit the worst of her wounds. She sat up, leaning against the cold stone wall, watching Fen with an intensity that made him uneasy. "The Jade Empire thinks they burned all the scrolls," Yuna whispered, her amber eyes scanning the dark barracks. "During the Great Purge, Lord Shen's serpent bureaucracy spent decades hunting down every scrap of our history. They wanted us to forget we were ever kings." Fen looked at the heavenly ledger, hovering in the air. "This scroll, it told me to form a pack. It told me to rebuild the pride." "It's more than a scroll," Yuna said, her voice growing stronger. "My grandmother told stories of the heavenly ledger. It was said to be a fragment of the primordial pact, the divine law that gave the wolves the duty to protect the balance of the world. When the boars and serpents rose, they broke the pact. They turned the world into a hierarchy of predators and prey." Fen looked at his hands. They were calloused and scarred from the mines, but they no longer trembled. "If this is the pact, then I am more than a slave." "You are a target," Kale interrupted, his voice hushed but urgent. "If the head miner, that bastard Grog, sees you acting like a leader, he'll crush you just to watch the hope die in your eyes." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the heavy iron bars of the barracks rattled. Grog, the massive Boar and Bell who oversaw the Iron-Hoof Mines, stood there. He was twice the size of a normal guard, his tusks capped in gold, his eyes small and cruel. "Selection time," Grog grunted. He pointed a thick sausage-like finger at Yuna. "The white one. The overseer wants a new servant for the manor. Fetch her." Two guards stepped forward. Yuna stood, her body tensing. She was a healer, but as she rose, her posture shifted into a combat stance Fen recognized from the ledger's memories. She was ready to die right here. Fen felt a cold rage bubbling up. The ledger turned a violent, shimmering gold. Trial of the pack, the first stand. Objective, prevent the capture of a pack member. Reward, skill unlock, Lunar Fang. Failure, loss of Yuna's trust / permanent chi reduction. Fen stood up. He didn't think, he simply moved. In the eyes of the guards, he was just another broken wolf. But as he stepped between the guards and Yuna, his movement was different. It was fluid, like water flowing uphill. "She stays," Fen said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that silenced the room. Grog laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "A slave speaks? A dog barks at its master?" He turned to his guards. "Break his legs. Leave the rest for the pit." The first guard lunged, swinging a heavy wooden club. Fen didn't flinch. Crescent step. To the guard, it looked like Fen simply vanished. In reality, he had stepped into the guard's shadow, his body vibrating with chi. He reappeared behind the brute, his fingers curled into a claw-like grip. Lunar Fang. Fen's hand struck the back of the guard's neck. A burst of silver light erupted at the point of impact. There was a sickening thud as the guard's chi meridians were momentarily overloaded, sending him crashing to the floor, unconscious before he hit the ground. The room went deathly silent. Even Kyle's jaw dropped. Fen looked at Grog, the heavenly ledger reflecting in his eyes like a rising moon. "I said," Fen repeated, his voice dropping an octave, "she stays." The silence in the barracks was so heavy, it felt like the mountain itself was pressing down on them. Grog's golden-capped tusks glinted in the dim torchlight as his face contorted from shock into a mask of purple-veined fury. To the boar Anbel, a wolf standing up was not just a defiance of orders. It was a violation of the natural order he had enforced for years. You mangy cur!" Grog growled, his voice a low vibration that made the hay on the floor tremble. "You think a little trick makes you a master? Guards, flay the skin from his back!" The remaining guards, 3 massive boars armed with iron-studded clubs, roared and charged simultaneously. They moved with the clumsy but devastating power of a landslide. Fen felt the air hum with the heavenly ledger's resonance. Current status, combat mode. Chi reserves, 85/100. Detected weaknesses, joint articulation, slow recovery after heavy swings. Mandate reminder: a leader's back is a shield for his pack. Fen didn't wait for them to reach him. He took a deep breath, drawing in the stale, dust-heavy air of the mines, and felt the silver chi spin faster in his abdomen. Crescent step. He blurred. To the guards, it felt like trying to catch a shadow cast by a flickering candle. One guard swung his club in a wide horizontal arc that would have crushed Fen's ribs, but the wolf was already gone. Fen reappeared in the guard's blind spot, his hand glowing with a faint, ghostly luminescence. Lunar Fang. This time, he didn't just strike the neck. He struck the guard's elbow joint, the silver chi piercing through the thick hide like a needle. There was a wet pop, and the guard's arm went limp, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Kyle! The keys!" Fen shouted over his shoulder, never taking his eyes off the next attacker. Kyle, the cynical veteran who had spent years telling Fen to keep his head down, looked at the fallen guard and then at the shimmering ledger reflected in Fen's eyes. Something in the old wolf's spirit, long since buried under layers of hopelessness, began to crack. "Damn it, kid," Kyle muttered, his hands finally moving with the speed of a thief. He lunged for the belt of the unconscious guard Fen had first downed. "If we're going to die, we might as well die with our hands around their throats." Yuna moved as well. Though still weak from her previous injuries, the silver chi Fen had gifted her acted as a catalyst. She grabbed a discarded mining pick, her amber eyes burning with a regal, ancient fire. She stood at Fen's flank, guarding his blind side. "The white wolf! She's moving like a warrior," one of the slaves whispered, his voice rising from the shadows of the barracks. "Look at Fen! He's not afraid!" another cried out. The energy in the room shifted. It was no longer a slaughter, it was becoming a riot. The other wolf Anbels, seeing their kin finally strike back, began to stand. They had no weapons, only their claws and their teeth, but there were dozens of them. Grog realized the situation was spiraling out of control. He pulled the heavy cleaver from his belt, the blade notched and stained with the blood of countless disposables. "I'll kill you myself," Grog roared, lunging forward with a speed that belied his massive bulk. Fen felt the ledger pulse a warning. This wasn't just a guard. This was a sub-boss who had refined his own crude chi through years of violence. The cleaver descended like a falling guillotine, trailing a dark, muddy aura. Fen crossed his forearms, the silver light of the shattered moon style flaring bright. The impact sent a shock wave through his boots, cracking the stone floor beneath him. "The pack!" Fen strained, his muscles bulging as he held back the massive blade. "Is no longer your prey." The iron grate of the barracks didn't just open. It was torn off its hinges, by the collective weight of 30 liberated wolves. Kyle had worked the locks with a desperation that turned his fingers bloody, and as the gate fell, the Iron-Hoof awakening truly began. "To the surface!" Kyle roared, his voice cracking with a decade of suppressed rage. "Follow the silver light!" Fen led the charge, the heavenly ledger hovering just ahead of him like a guiding star. It mapped the corridors of the Iron-Hoof Mines, highlighting the patrol routes of the reinforcement guards and the structural pillars that could be collapsed to slow pursuit. "Fen, the lift at the central shaft is the fastest way out, but they'll have the hawks there," Yuna shouted, her white fur a streak of moonlight in the soot-covered tunnels. "Then we take the ventilation flues," Fen decided, his mind processing the ledger's data at a terrifying speed. "Kale, take the elders and the wounded through the drainage pipes. Yuna and I will draw the guards toward the main gate." "That's suicide!" Kale barked. "No," Fen said, looking back at the ragtag group of survivors. "It's leadership." As the group split, Fen and Yuna sprinted toward the heart of the mining complex. The environmental storytelling of the Empire's cruelty was everywhere. Rows of tiny cages where smaller anbels were kept. Massive vats of toxic chemicals used to refine spirit stones, and walls etched with the names of those who had died in the dark. They reached the Great Hall, a cavernous space where the overseers lived in luxury while the slaves rotted below. Here, the architecture shifted from crude stone to ornate Chinese-style woodwork and silk tapestries, a jarring contrast to the misery just a few levels down. "There they are! The runaways!" A high-pitched screech echoed from the rafters. Fen looked up. A group of hawk anbels, clad in light leather armor and armed with repeating crossbows, circled the ceiling. They were the scouts of the serpent bureaucracy, the eyes that ensured no one ever escaped the Iron Hoof. Whip, whip, whip. Bolts rained down like iron hail. "Behind the pillars," Fen commanded, pulling Yuna into the cover of a massive red lacquered column. New skill unlocked. Lunar Veil. Description: a defensive technique that uses chi to distort light, making the user difficult to track. Requirement: protect a pack member under fire. Reward: plus 50 EXP. Skill: Lunar Veil. Fen closed his eyes, focusing on the spinning silver vortex in his core. He didn't just feel the chi. He felt the moonlight that existed even in the dark, a celestial connection that the ledger was helping him reclaim. He stepped out from the pillar, but he didn't move toward the hawks. He moved around them. The lunar veil made his silhouette shimmer and fade. To the hawks, it looked like Fen was a ghost, appearing in 3 places at once. Confused, they fired wildly, their bolts hitting nothing but shadows. "Now, Yuna!" Fen yelled. Yuna leapt from cover, her mining pick imbued with a flicker of the chi Fen had shared with her. She didn't need to kill them. She only needed to ground them. She struck the support ropes of the hanging chandeliers, sending the massive, flaming light fixtures crashing into the hawks' perches. The hall erupted in fire and smoke. Amidst the chaos, Fen saw the massive iron-bound doors that led to the outside world. He could smell it now, the scent of pine needles, fresh rain, and the cold, thin air of the mountains. With one final, concentrated burst of lunar fang, Fen shattered the great lock. The doors groaned open, swinging wide to reveal a world bathed in the glow of a full, silver moon. Fen stood at the threshold, the wind whipping through his matted fur. Behind him, the smoke of the Iron-Hoof Mines billowed into the night. Beside him, Yuna stood tall, her eyes reflecting the stars, she hadn't seen in years. "We're out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Fen said, looking at the distant, jagged silhouettes of the northern mountains. "We're just beginning." The heavenly ledger flared a brilliant, satisfied gold. Part 1, The Iron-Hoof Awakening, complete. New objective, reach the lowland outskirts. Current pack size, 42. Mandate, the first step of 1,000 miles, begins with a single howl.